Chapter 1. Bar tab for 2. Ren had a rule about bars on weeknights. He didn't go to them. He had rent due on the 1st, a phone plan he'd been meaning to downgrade for 6 months, and a body that required at least 7 hours of sleep to be functional enough for data entry by 9. Bars were a luxury. Loud, expensive, and full of people who had enough money not to count their drinks. He broke the rule on a Thursday in October, because his coworker Jia had just been promoted to the position Ren had been quietly hoping for since March, and he needed somewhere to sit with that feeling before he brought it home to his studio apartment where the walls were thin and his neighbors would hear him feel sorry for himself. The bar was called Vesper. He'd picked it because it was halfway between his office and the subway, not because it was the kind of place that served cocktails with names he couldn't pronounce in a space lit the amber of expensive things. He sat at the far end of the counter with his salary-appropriate beer and told himself one drink, just one, then the subway, then sleep. The man sat down beside him 20 minutes later. Ren noticed him the way you notice a change in air pressure, not deliberately, just physically. He was tall, in a suit that had been cut by someone who understood the difference between dressing a body and displaying it, with dark hair and the particular kind of face that made Ren think. This person has never had to wait for anything. Not arrogant, just effortless, like the world had always said yes to him and he'd stopped noticing that it did. Whatever he's having, the man said to the bartender, nodding at Ren's glass. Then, glancing sideways, unless that's terrible. It's a domestic lager, Ren said. It's fine. Fine is underrated. The man extended a hand. Jaehan. Ren. They shook. Jaehan's grip was dry and certain. The grip of someone who'd shaken 1,000 hands. He settled onto the stool as if claiming it, flagged the bartender, and then turned back to Ren with the focused attention of someone who had decided, without fanfare, that this conversation was going to be interesting. You look like someone stole something from you, Jaehan said. Promotion, Ren said. Went to someone else. Were you better than them? Yes. He hadn't meant to say it that flatly. He added, probably. I don't know. Maybe. That's 3 different answers. It's been a long Thursday. Jaehan smiled. It was a small smile, not performed, the kind that happened when something actually landed. He ordered a second round before the first was finished, and Ren, who had a rule about weeknight bars, discovered he'd also had a rule about talking to strangers that he was apparently also abandoning tonight. They talked the way people talk when they have nothing to protect. Easily, without agenda, letting the conversation go wherever it wanted. Jaehan was in acquisitions. He named the company and Ren recognized it as the sort of name that appeared in news about very large sums of money. Ren worked in logistics data for a mid-sized import firm. He did not name it. He suspected Jaehan would not have heard of it. 3 drinks became 4. The bar filled and thinned. At some point Ren stopped counting, which was how he knew something had gone wrong with his plan. The last thing he would clearly remember was Jaehan's shoulder warm against his, a laugh that surprised him out of his own chest, and the October cold sharp on his face when they finally stepped outside, and then the way Jaehan looked at him under the street light, unhurried, like a question asked without urgency, waiting for the answer to arrive in its own time. He woke up in a hotel room he didn't recognize, in a bed that was nicer than anything he'd slept in before, and Jaehan was gone. On the nightstand, a glass of water, 2 tablets of painkiller, and a folded note that said only, "Thank you for tonight, Jay." Ren lay there for a long moment. Then he got up, found his clothes and went home. He did not leave his number. There was no number to leave. They had not exchanged them. The night existed in the way that things sometimes do when you are 27 and tired and human. Completely, and then it was over. He told himself he was fine with that. He was mostly fine with that. Chapter 2. The line on the test. The nausea started 3 weeks later in the middle of a spreadsheet. Ren's first assumption was the office cafeteria's tuna casserole. His second assumption was stress. His third assumption, the one he bought a test for at the pharmacy 2 blocks from work on a lunch break, the one he took in the single-occupancy bathroom on the 3rd floor where no one would see him, was the one that made him sit on the floor with his back against the door and stare at the ceiling for 6 minutes without moving. 2 lines. He was 27 years old. He worked in logistics data. He made enough money to cover rent and groceries and the occasional beer that sometimes turned into 4 and ended in a hotel room with a man whose last name he did not know. He lived alone in a studio apartment. He had no family in the city. He had 2 close friends, both of whom had full lives of their own, and a mother 4 hours away who still thought he was straight. He was also, this was the part that the world had opinions about, the part that doctors wrote papers about and talk show hosts called remarkable and strangers on the internet called unnatural, one of approximately 1 in 80,000 men born with a biological configuration that made this possible. The medical term was androgynous gestation variance. The colloquial terms were less kind. Ren had known since he was 19. He had told almost no one. He had taken precautions, mostly. He had not taken precautions on a Thursday in October because he had not planned for Thursday in October to be the kind of night it was. He sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Then he got up, washed his hands, straightened his collar, and went back to the spreadsheet that he made his decision quietly, the way he made most decisions. Not all at once, but in increments, each small choice leading to the next. He would keep the baby. He could not have explained to anyone who asked exactly why. It wasn't religion or politics or even certainty. It was something lower than logic, a pull in the center of him that said, yes, this. What he would not do was find Jaehan. He didn't know his last name. He didn't know which company exactly, only the sector. He had a first name and a memory of a hotel lobby and a note that said thank you. It was not enough to find a person, and even if it had been, what would he say? What could he say that wouldn't destroy something? He told himself it was a practical decision. He told himself this often enough that it mostly felt true. He called his mother. He did not tell her everything, but he told her enough, and she drove 4 hours without being asked and sat in his studio apartment and held his hand and said, "We'll figure it out." They did. Slowly, painfully, practically. Ren worked until his 7th month. He moved to a cheaper apartment in a quieter neighborhood. He learned, over the course of 8 months and 11 days, what he was capable of, which was more than he had known before. He named the baby Sue. Short, simple, easy to call across a room. Sue arrived in the world at 4:17 in the morning, small and furious and already looking, Ren thought, slightly judgmental. He had dark hair and wide eyes and a mouth that curved when he slept in a way that made Ren's chest do something painful and enormous. He looked, in the fragile first days, extraordinarily like a man Ren had met once in a bar on a Thursday in October. Ren noticed this and filed it away and chose, deliberately and with great care, not to think about it. He had enough to think about. Chapter 3. 3 years, 1 name. Sue at 3 was a compact, serious-faced child who had opinions about which cup his juice went in and could name every vehicle on a construction site by sound before he saw it. He liked being read to, disliked loud music, and had recently developed an intense devotion to a stuffed rabbit named Bun who had to be present at all meals, or the meal did not happen. Ren's life had reorganized itself around Sue the way a room reorganizes around a new piece of furniture. Completely, and in a way that made the old arrangement hard to remember. He had returned to work after 4 months. His firm had a small remote option, and he had negotiated himself into it with the same quiet persistence he applied to everything. His mother came twice a month. His friends Jia and Cass took turns with weekends. It was a life held together by careful management and the love of people who showed up. Ren was grateful for it in the practical, unglamorous way he was grateful for most things. Fully, without making a production of it. He did not date. There was no dramatic reason for this. It was simply that the logistics of his life left little room, and the specific secret of his body made the logistics of dating feel like a problem he didn't have the energy to solve. Who do you tell? When? What do you say? By the way, I can carry a child. I have carried one. His name is Sue and he's 3 and he has his father's eyes and I have never told his father he exists. Also, I would like to see you again. He had almost laughed, drafting that sentence in his head on a night when loneliness had been loud enough to notice. Almost. He was fine. He was genuinely fine. Not the brittle kind of fine that means the opposite, but the kind that means, I have built something real and I am living in it and most days it is enough. Most days. Chapter 4. Lobby, 9 a.m. The meeting was at Cade Group's central office, which was in a tower downtown that Ren walked past sometimes when he took the long way to the subway. He was there because his firm had won a small contract for data auditing, Not glamorous but stable, which was what Ren valued, and he was presenting the initial assessment to their client liaison. He had Sue with him because daycare had called at 7:30 to say the facility had a water pipe issue and was closed for the day, and his mother was not due until Friday, and Jia had a morning presentation she could not move, and Cass did not answer the phone before 10. The meeting was at 9. He had done the math and arrived at bring the child, apologize, be professional. Sue was wearing his backpack with Bun inside it and had been bribed with the promise of the small park near the office afterward. He was, for the moment, cooperative, standing very straight beside Ren in the lobby, looking around with the wide-eyed appraisal of a 3-year-old encountering a marble floor for the first time. Big, Sue said of the lobby. Very big, Ren agreed, checking the time on his phone. Is this where the important people live? They work here. It's different. Oh, Sue considered this. Do they like it? Ren opened his mouth to answer and stopped, because across the lobby, coming through the glass doors from the street, in a coat that cost more than Ren's monthly rent, with his phone to his ear and his attention on whatever the call was saying, was a man he had met once, 3 years ago, in a bar called Vesper on a bad Thursday in October. Taller than he remembered. Same face. The kind of face that didn't change much. Jaehan. Ren's body made several decisions before his mind caught up. He turned slightly away. He moved behind the lobby pillar. He put his hand on Sue's shoulder and pointed at a large abstract sculpture near the reception desk and said, very calmly, "Look at that, bud. What do you think that is?" Buying himself approximately 30 seconds to do something with the fact that his heart was doing something unreasonable in his chest. The call ended. Jaehan lowered his phone. And then, with the specific cruelty of the universe in a demonstrative mood, he turned and walked toward the elevators, which were directly beside the pillar Ren was standing behind, and stopped, because his path was blocked by a 3-year-old who had abandoned the sculpture appraisal and wandered into the open. Jaehan looked down. Sue looked up. There was a pause. "Hello," said Sue, with the absolute social confidence of a toddler who had not yet learned to be self-conscious. "Hello," said Jaehan, who looked, for one unguarded moment, completely charmed. And then he looked up, because Ren had stepped out from behind the pillar, because there was nothing else to do, and the charm went still on his face, replaced by something slower, more careful. Recognition working its way through 3 years of absence. "Ren," he said, not a question. "Hi," said Ren. His voice was steady. He was genuinely surprised at how steady it was. I have a meeting. I should. Cade Group. A beat. Yes. I'm your liaison." Jaehan looked at him, then at Sue, then back at him. His expression was unreadable in the precise way of someone reading a great deal. "Come on up." Chapter 5. He has your eyes. The meeting went fine. Ren was professional. He was always professional. It was the one thing he could rely on himself for regardless of circumstances. And Jaehan was professional, and Sue sat under the conference table with Bun and a packet of crackers and was miraculously quiet. It was after the meeting, in the elevator down, that Jaehan said, "He looks like me." Ren stared at the elevator doors. "He looks like himself. Ren. He's 3 years old. Keep moving. Keep breathing. Children look like all kinds of things. His eyes. I really have to get him to a park, we promised. Ren." Jaehan's voice was not loud. It was not harsh. It was the voice of someone who had learned that you didn't have to be loud to be heard. "Look at me." Ren looked at him. This was a mistake. Jaehan was watching him with an expression that was not accusation and not anger and not the reaction Ren had spent 3 years bracing for. It was something much harder to deflect, which was simple, honest attention. "Is he mine?" Jaehan asked. The elevator opened. Ren stepped out into the lobby, took Sue's hand, and said, not turning around, "No." He felt the lie in his molars. He walked to the park. He pushed Sue on the swings for 40 minutes and watched his son laugh, the full-body laugh of a 3-year-old at maximum velocity, and thought about a man in an elevator asking a simple question in a simple voice and the way Ren had answered it, and felt something crack quietly in his chest. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I know you said no. I'm not going to push, but I'd like to talk. Jaehan. Your firm has my contact info. I asked them to pass it along. I hope that's all right. Ren sat on a park bench while Sue investigated a pile of leaves with scientific rigor and held his phone and thought. He thought about 3 years of doing it alone. He thought about the specific tilt of Sue's head when he was thinking hard, which was identical to a tilt he had seen once across a bar counter. Jaehan was quiet for a moment. Not shocked. Ren suspected he hadn't been fully convinced by the elevator no. Just absorbing, processing. His hands were flat on the table and his expression was the careful kind, assembled with deliberate effort. Okay, he said. Okay. I have questions, obviously, but, he exhaled. Okay. First. He looked up. Are you all right? Were you all right? The whole. I was fine, Ren said reflexively. Ren. I was mostly fine. He looked at the table. I had people. It was hard for a while and then it was less hard. He's a good kid. He seems extraordinary, Jaehan said quietly. From the 40 seconds I spent with him. Something in Ren's chest moved. He pressed on. I should have found you. I know that. I told myself I couldn't. I didn't have enough information and that was partially true, but the rest of it was that I was afraid. Of what it would mean. Of what you would think. Of me. Ren stopped. He had not said this to anyone, not in this form. I'm one of the I have the condition. The one that made it possible. Most people don't know. Almost no one knows. And the ones who find out have reactions. And I didn't know what yours would be. And I was scared. And I ran. The cafe was quiet around them. Music in the background, the small clatter of cups. What kind of reactions? Jaehan asked. His voice was level. Not horrified. Not fascinated in the wrong way. Just asking. People call it unnatural, Ren said. They call it, there are a lot of words. Monster is one that gets used. He said it flat like it didn't cost him anything. He had practiced that. Jaehan's jaw moved slightly. The leveled expression did not change, but something beneath it shifted. The way pressure shifts in a room before a storm. And you believed them. Ren opened his mouth. Closed it. The honest answer was, yes. Not fully. Not always. But the stone was in his pocket and it had weight and he had been walking with it so long he had stopped noticing the way it pulled him to one side. I believed them enough to hide, he said finally. Which is the same thing, I think. Jaehan looked at him for a long time. Then he reached across the table. Slowly, not demanding anything, and put his hand over Ren's. I would like to know my son, he said. And I would like, if you'll let me, to be here. For both of you. I'm not going to pretend I know what that looks like yet. But I'm asking. Ren looked down at the hand over his. He thought about the note that had said thank you and the elevator and the park bench and 3 years of being quietly, competently alone. I need you to go slow, Ren said. With him. He doesn't know you. He's 3. Of course. And I need. I'm not ready for. This isn't. I know, Jaehan said. I'm not asking for anything but a start. Just a start. Ren looked at him. He nodded once. Outside, it had started to rain, light, almost nothing, the kind of rain that means something is coming but is not yet here. Chapter 7. What you are. Jaehan went slow. Credit where it was due. He was better at it than Ren had expected. He did not arrive with grand gestures or overwhelming force. He arrived with patience, which was harder and more valuable. He met Sue properly on a Sunday at the park on neutral ground. He brought nothing, no toys, no gifts, nothing that could be read as a bid. He simply sat on the bench beside Ren and let Sue come to him in his own time, which took approximately 11 minutes, because Sue was constitutionally incapable of ignoring a new person for longer than that. Do you know what a bulldozer is? Sue asked, upon arrival, standing in front of Jaehan with the gravity of someone opening a job interview. I do, Jaehan said. What about an excavator? The one with the long arm and the scoop. Sue stared at him for a moment, assessing. Then he sat down on the bench on the other side of Jaehan, bun on his lap and said, Okay, you can stay. Ren watched this from approximately 1 foot away with his hands in his pockets and felt something in him loosen, just slightly. like a not given the smallest amount of slack. Jaehan came on Sundays, then sometimes on weekday evenings, quietly, with dinner from somewhere nicer than what Ren would have bought. He fixed the cabinet door that had been slightly off its hinge since Ren moved in, without being asked, and did not make a thing of it. He learned Su's routines and honored them, the specific cup, the presence of bun, the order of the bedtime books. He did not rush Ren. He did not treat him like a project or a problem or a miracle. He treated him the way he had treated him in a bar 3 years ago, like a person worth talking to. Full stop. One evening, after Su was asleep and they were sitting at the kitchen table with tea, Jaehan said carefully, "Can I ask you something?" "You already are," Ren said. "The word you used. Monster." Jaehan's hands were around his cup. "Do you still hear it? In your head?" Ren was quiet. The apartment was quiet. From Su's room, the small sound of deep breathing. "Sometimes," he said, "when something goes wrong, when I'm tired, it's not constant, but it's there. Because of the way you are. Because of what I can do. What I did." "What you did," Jaehan said, "is raise my son for 3 years by yourself, while working full-time, while carrying a secret that you were afraid of, while being braver than you think you were." He paused. "What you are is the reason Su exists. And Su is—" He stopped. Something moved in his face. Genuine, unpolished. "He is the best thing I have walked into in my life, accidentally or otherwise." Ren looked at the table. His jaw was tight in the specific way of someone not doing the thing their body wanted to do, which was come apart just a little in a place where it was safe. "There is nothing wrong with you, Ren," Jaehan said. "There is nothing monstrous about you. And I will say that as many times as it takes." The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need filling. Ren reached across the table and covered Jaehan's hand with his. Reversed, this time. His turn. Jaehan turned his hand over and held on. And neither of them said anything, and the apartment was warm, and Su breathed softly in the next room. Slowly, the way ice thins in early spring, not all at once, first at the edges where the water is already moving. Ren let the stone out of his pocket. Not thrown away, not forgotten, but set down. He found, without it, that he stood differently. Chapter 8. Again and again and again. They did not fall back into each other dramatically. There was no single moment, no pivot point, no scene where everything resolved and the music swelled. It happened the way real things happen. Incrementally, undramatically, with a great deal of negotiation and occasional miscommunication and the specific comedy of 2 adults trying to build something real while a 3-year-old with opinions about juice cups supervised. Jaehan moved some of his things in by degrees. First a change of clothes, then a toothbrush, then the French press he'd complained Ren's apartment lacked. And if this was noticed, it was not commented on until Su one morning said, "Jaehan, your jacket is on our hook," with the satisfaction of someone who had filed this information and found it correct. "It is," Jaehan agreed. "Are you staying?" He looked at Ren over Su's head. Ren raised an eyebrow, not a refusal, just, "This is your moment. Navigate it." "I'm staying," Jaehan said. "If that's all right." Su thought about this. "You have to follow the cup rules," he said finally. "I know the cup rules. And Bun sits at the table. Bun always sits at the table." Su nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to his breakfast. Ren pressed his mouth together against a smile. Jaehan caught it and looked quietly delighted. Ren told his mother, finally, the whole truth, the condition, Jaehan, the years in between. She cried, and then she was angry, and then she cried again, and then she said, "I just wish you hadn't carried it alone so long." She met Jaehan the following month and spent 45 minutes quizzing him on his intentions, while Su showed him her recipe cards, and Ren hid in the kitchen pretending to wash dishes. He heard Jaehan's voice, steady and patient, answering everything. When he came back in, his mother's expression had shifted from assessment to something closer to approval. Jaehan told his family, too. There were complications, there are always complications in families that have organized themselves around expectations, but he was the kind of person who did not need permission to know what mattered. He brought Su to his parents' house in the spring, and Sue sat in the middle of their formal living room and asked his grandfather about the fountain in the garden with such sincere urgency that the man's composure lasted approximately 4 minutes before giving way entirely. Ren watched this from the doorway and thought, "Look at this child. Look at what he is. Look at what we made." The second pregnancy he discovered on a Tuesday, with no spreadsheet involved this time, in the bathroom of an apartment that now had 2 toothbrushes and a French press and a hook with 2 jackets on it. He sat down on the edge of the tub, test in hand, and felt, not panic, not dread, not the hollow falling sensation of the first time. Something warmer, larger, terrifying in a different way, the way good things are terrifying when you have finally learned to let yourself have them. He called Jaehan in from the other room. Jaehan stood in the doorway and looked at the test and then at Ren, and something moved across his face. The quiet enormity of a person who is trying not to show how much something matters before he knows if it's all right to. "Are you?" Jaehan started. "Yes," Ren said. "I'm good. Yes." Jaehan crossed the room and sat down beside him on the edge of the tub, ridiculous and small for 2 adults, neither of them acknowledging this, and put his arm around him, and Ren leaned in, and they sat there for a while with the test between them and the morning light coming through the frosted window and Sue's voice floating down the hall, asking Bun an extremely serious question about trucks. "We should tell him carefully," Ren said. "He's going to have thoughts. Extensive thoughts," Jaehan agreed. "He's going to want the baby to know about excavators immediately." "Obviously," Ren laughed. It was the full kind, the kind that came from somewhere uncomplicated, and Jaehan turned to look at him with an expression that was not subtle and not performative and not anything other than exactly what it was. "You're beautiful," Jaehan said simply because he had learned, it had taken time but he had learned, that the things that needed saying were better said. Ren looked at him. The stone was gone. Had been gone, gradually, for months. Left behind in coffee shops and Sunday parks and kitchen tables and 100 ordinary moments that added up to something that didn't have a word grander than safe. "I know," Ren said, and meant it. From down the hall, "Appa, Bun says breakfast." They got up. They went. The apartment smelled like morning and coffee and the particular warmth of a home that had been built slowly, with difficulty, by people who had decided it was worth it. And it was entirely and completely worth it. End.